God's will.
What you're seeking is a blessing from God.
You must expect a miracle.
You have the power of choice.
Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robinson. You know, when everybody at some point goes through, the big questions of life, why am I here? Who am I? What is it all for? And so when we talk about these ideas of identity and purpose and meaning, it very often, it can, if we don't have clear direction, it can break down. It can get difficult. And identity, I think, if you look in our culture, is kind of a starting point. And a lot of people get tangled up in identity. And that's one thing about the gospel that I love, because it tells you who you are in Christ. And from there, you find meaning and you find purpose. And so if you're struggling, maybe with identity, I get it. There are a lot of influences, how we are raised. Of course, culture is a big one right now. And culture right now is a mess when it comes to this idea of identity. You're not going to get, I don't think, any satisfaction in looking to the culture for identity or for telling you what your identity is. So where do we go? Well, I have someone here with me, and actually she was on the broadcast show. It hasn't aired yet. It airs December 6th. And so I've had a chance to talk with her backstage a bit, and I'm excited to bring you her story, because I think a lot of you will identify with different things that she's gone through, and maybe it'll help encourage you, point you in the right direction. Chat is open, by the way. Hello, Loretta. Hello, Judy. Good to have you guys here today. If you haven't followed or subscribed, this is a great time to do that. Hit share, hit like, all those fun things, and you will be blessed, I promise you, by today's guest. She has her story in a book that's available now. It's called Sweet Like Jasmine, or Jasmine, depending on where you're from. And it tells her story, and you're going to get to hear it right now on Life Today Live. Bonnie Gray, welcome. Good to see you again.
Randy, I'm so happy to be here with you again. I'm enjoying a virtual cup of coffee with you, so thank you.
I do have mine as well. So I'm just going to let you go and tell us. I mean, I want people to get the full picture, because as difficult as it has been, a lot of times to get to the mountaintop, you have to walk through the valley, and those valleys are hard, and a lot of people they're struggling in the valleys. I want to hear your story to encourage people how to get to that mountaintop, because we can get there. We're supposed to get there. So please tell us your story.
Well, my mother was a mail order bride from Hong Kong. My father was a busboy in a noodle shop, and I was born in San Francisco, Chinatown. And that's something that I have hidden all my life, because it just seems so strange and odd. I was born in San Francisco, Chinatown, so I'm an American. And part of my American upbringing is that I always have a choice to choose my story. But actually, when I stepped back home, my home life was very different from what I felt everybody else's life was. I didn't feel like I chose my story. Because my...
Go ahead. I mean, none of us do, I want you to continue, but why would that be an issue as far as, your mother being who she is, your father being who he is? I mean, like you say, you didn't choose it. I'm curious, did something happen to belittle that upbringing, or is this something you just felt on your own?
Well, I think that's kind of part of this journey. The book I wrote, Sweet Like Jasmine, about finding my identity in a culture of loneliness. I always felt that these were private matters in my family. And later on, as I grew up, it seemed like harder and harder to share about these kind of odd things about my family. And I think we all have like a family culture or a family code. So like when I went to school, it seemed like everybody else's had a mom and a dad. And, like for instance, when I was growing up, there's a concert recital or something at school. Well, everybody else had a mom and dad cheering for them in the audience. But My dad left when I was 7 years old. He abandoned me and my mother. And that was another odd piece of my life because, I didn't have anybody to clap for me. And my mother was working different jobs. She wasn't interested in what was happening at school. And that's really hard for me to say, Randy, because in our culture, and especially even our Christian culture, it might be easy to say, hey, my dad is disconnected from me. He's cold. But it's hard for me to say, you know what? My mom is not a very loving mom. Yeah, it's because I never heard anybody. It's not that somebody bullied me. It's more like nobody ever talked about the things that were hard. And at church, like you said, most of us talk about the mountaintop experiences. But for somebody like me, who grew up in a very kind of dysfunctional home where it was broken, I didn't feel like anybody would be interested, first of all, and second, would understand. So it just seemed like I had different parts of my life. I had my home life, then I had my church life, then I had my school life. But there wasn't one place where I felt like all pieces of Bonnie were together.
Yeah. Now, were you raised in church?
I was, because the Chinese church is actually where people go, like the Chinese community, where people could find other people that spoke the same language. So it was kind of like a social community gathering. And so when I went to church, like I said, especially the Christian culture, everybody had a mom and dad. And it seemed like everybody had a happy family. That even those one other, guy in my youth group had come from a Doors family, but he saw his dad every other week. But my dad never came back for me. I would check the mailbox every birthday and hoping he would send me a card. He never sent me a card. And then when I graduated, I was 18, I thought, hey, maybe my mom, we kind of make up stories, when we go through a valley, but when we kind of keep it private, I think we try to make up stories that make us feel better. And so I kind of made up this story in my mind. You know what? Maybe my dad was prevented from coming back for me because my mom is like, she's a tough woman. I mean, she'll say anything, verbal. I found out later it was verbal abuse and emotional abuse. But I was like, hey, maybe my dad wants to meet me, but he has to wait till I'm 18, kind of like this movie, right? Like, after I give my speech, I was a valedictorian in my high school. And after I gave my speech, the crowds are going to depart. And, there's going to be a man that comes through the crowd and say, I'm your father, Bonnie. I have been waiting for you to be an adult so we can be reunited. And I kind of longed for that. But that moment didn't come. So once I turned 18, I said, you know what? That's so childish. I don't care where my dad is. I don't even care if he's dead or alive. He left me. Why should I care? So I kind of just told myself to grow up. And so I just forgot about him until I ran across my birth certificate when I was a mom myself. So this whole journey of going back into my past, I definitely saw no need for it. As far as I was concerned, I was a believer. I thought that faith was an eraser.
Yeah.
Because at the time, a lot of times when you hear in the pulpit, it says, forget the past. Don't let the past drag you down, move towards the future. So I was like, hey, I'm all for that. I hate my past. So let's just get rid of that. So that I had no trouble with that, forgetting the past. So I thought that faith was an eraser and I just wanted to start a new family. I wanted to erase the past and just build a new legacy of faith. But I thought that meant don't talk about things that were terrible. Just talk about the good things, the mountaintops. But you know what? Most of life is in the valley. It really is. I mean, obviously God gives us the grace to get through them, but that's a very lonely life. I didn't realize it until later. Like I said, once I became a mom and I stumbled on my birth certificate. I was looking for a birth certificate for my older son. I have 2 boys. And I named them Josh and Caleb because my husband and I, we wanted to start a new family of faith. So we said, you know what? Let's just forget about the past, start new, blank slate. And it's very exciting. But once I had my baby boy, Caleb, as any new parent knows, you got to put that older kid in preschool. even if it's for 2 hours, helping him make popsicle stick art, cutting construction paper up, just to get that breather. But I stumbled on my own birth certificate, and I never looked at my birth certificate closely. How about you? Have you ever looked at your birth certificate closely?
Yeah. We're not going to go down that path entirely, but yeah, I mean, yes. What did you find though that changed your perception?
Well, I never really read it. I kind of just showed it once when I got married. You got to bring papers to prove your identity. But I realized looking at it, said Chinese hospital. And I was like, whoa, why was I born in a hospital named after a race and ethnicity? I was very curious. And then second, when I looked at the age of the mother that gave birth, it said 18. My mother was 18 years old when she had me. And it just kind of, I got married later in life, Randy. So in my 30s. So I had my first baby when I was 35. And I was like, gosh, wow, at 18, my mom had me. And it brought me back. And it had this thought that had never occurred to me. One day my sons are going to grow up. They're going to ask me, where is grandpa? And I don't know. Do you remember I told you that moment I said, Randy, when I said, once I turned 18, I didn't care anymore where my dad was? Mm-hmm. It didn't matter if he's dead or alive. Suddenly I realized I can't give the answer my mother gave me to my children, right, which was, don't ask me. I don't know. Who cares? It doesn't matter. And I realized I do not want to tell my children that, because I carried the shame of having missing pieces in my life. It was like a sense of shame that I didn't know where my dad was. I didn't know why he wasn't in my life. And so I kind of just would gloss over it. I was very quote unquote private, right? Mm-hmm. But actually it's lonely. It's a part of my identity that God, as I found out, was going to help me find, because I decided for my children, I'm going to find out, where is my dad? Is he dead or alive? Yeah. Why did he leave me? And what happened to him? So I went back to try to find first my childhood home, because I realized I don't even, I never saw it. I never went back to Chinatown. I just wanted to leave that past behind me, that broken past behind me. And then I wanted to give the answers to my children. But of course, God is really, he's good. He knew that curiosity and doing it for my children would get me curious about the past. But it turns out, as I uncovered these family secrets I'd run away my whole life, really the answers were for me. It was God knows the things we hide, but he knows that they're important. Yeah. And he does not want us to put us to the side. He does not want to put our hearts to the side. God can handle any hard thing. Nothing is too taboo, broken, hard, or difficult for God. Mm-hmm. He loves us, and he wants to say, I will go there with you. I am with you.
And I see that no matter where you come from. I mean, being adopted at birth and growing up in the home of James and Betty Robinson, I never felt a sense of abandonment like a lot of adoptees, I understand, do. I never lacked for identity. But when I had my first two children, and the doctors are saying, does this run in your family? Does this run in your family? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. That's actually what got me down to the courthouse looking and found eventually my birth mother, and was able to answer a lot of the medical questions. And it really, it brought a lot of, I think, healing for her. And when I found my biological father 23 years later, same thing. Yeah, I know, whole other story. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, gosh, the whole past and how it impacts us. I'm curious though, because there's a gap in your story that I'm sure is covered in your book. I'll show people the book, Sweet Like Jasmine. There it is, available now. But there's a gap between your high school, 18, and when you got married in your 30s. What was going on then? I mean, were you doing well, or did this the lack of the father impact you in a bunch of negative ways, or had you just pretty much moved on?
I love that you're so perceptive in my storytelling, because that's kind of what happened. I kind of grew up, and I kind of took on what I call the cookie cutter life, meaning I wanted to get away from my past. And by God's grace, He gives us the strength to get through those hard times. So I kind of go to school, figure out, okay, how do I do well in school? I go to church. Okay, what do I need to do? Not that I was fake. It's all genuine, but like, I want this belonging. I want to be included, So I kind of I became the Bible study leader. I became this, like great student. It's kind of the typical achiever, producer, encourager, cheerful, optimistic kind of identity. But meanwhile, all these things that are happening at home, I hid them. And so I like to tell this story because it kind of defines a vow that I once made to myself. And I carried it into my relationship with God. So I grew up below the poverty line because when my father left, it's my mother. She didn't graduate from high school. She quit school when she was 13 to take care of her siblings. My mother herself was one of 8 children because she wasn't the oldest and she wasn't a son. In the traditional Chinese culture, if you're not the oldest and you're not the son, you're not very valued. So when it came time to improve their situation in life, to immigrate to America, they chose my mother to marry a stranger 10 years older. So, we grew up below the poverty line and we didn't have money to see the doctor. We don't have medical insurance. So one time I was sick and we saw the Chinese doctor, which is herbs, herbs, natural remedies, which is great. And it's very effective, but it only works to some point where if you're really sick, you need antibiotics and only a Western doctor can prescribe it. So one day out of the blue, I had a sore throat. I was running a fever. I had sores on my throat and in my gums. And I know now as a mother, I probably had hand, foot, mouth disease, which is, it's just so painful. So anyhow, my mother dropped me off, drove me. This is after they were divorced and my father had disappeared, dropped me off in the parking lot of the Chinese restaurant, Tao Tao restaurant. And she said, your father works here. I want you to go in there and get some money because look, you're sick. We need money for the doctors. And look, whatever you have, you gave it to your younger sister. So you better get the money from him and don't come back to the car unless you have that money. And so she just opened the door and pushed me out of the car. And as I was walking to the restaurant, I had no idea what I would say to him. I had not seen him for a long while. I didn't even know my mother knew where he was. And I wasn't allowed to ask her. The day my father left, they were yelling. They were always fighting. And at the screen door, though, this time my father had suitcases. And I was so confused. They were arguing. The last image I had of my father was him driving off in his olive green Nova, tires squealing off the driveway. And I asked Ama, where is Baba? Ama is, Chinese for Ama. And she said, get over here. She pulled the photo albums out from the console. She started ripping his photos out and started cutting them up. All the pictures of him. And she gave me a pair of scissors and said, cut up the photos of this man. I don't want any more photos of him. And as I was cutting, I was trying to hide one photo and she caught me and she's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm not in this photo. You're not in this photo. Can we just keep one? She said, oh, why? Do you like him so much? Fine, you go live with him. She dragged me across the room by my collar, shirt collar. And she starts pretending to dial and go pack your stuff. You're leaving. And right then and there, Randy, I stopped crying. And I said, no, I don't need to know. I kind of made that first vow to myself. Look, if I can't change something, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm just going to, I carried that into my adulthood, it didn't matter how I feel. Just as long as I got things done, as long as other people were happy, I was kind of the person that just was afraid of conflict. Yeah. So I would always take the path of least resistance. And that's a very lonely life because I didn't realize later I'm hiding. I'm making choices that are really not true to who, God created me to be. But I did it because that's how I could find approval, how I could find acceptance. So,
given your mother's treatment, both by both in Hong Kong and then when she got to the United States, did you carry and your father's absence? I mean, these are all things that would easily contribute to a sense of a lack of value.
Yes.
Has that been an issue with you?
Yes, but nobody would have known that, Randy, because the way I tried to seek value was through serving in church.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also through, getting good grades, getting a good job,
Mm-hmm.
performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody would know that I had a lack of self-worth. And in fact, I didn't know I had a lack of self-worth. I thought that I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do, which is putting others before myself. But as as I told that story, you can recognize that's really something my mom taught me, is that
Mm-hmm.
how you feel is not important. But I know you wanted to ask me a question.
Well, no, I'm just curious what changed all this.
Oh, well, what happened was that when I found that birth certificate, I started, because at that time I already had 2 kids. I had a loving husband. I felt like I already made it past a terrible childhood, right?
Yeah.
But this is the thing. God used my faith to get me through the hard times. And even though those things I did it for performance or finding my value, God understood. He still used it. He still used, my desire to serve others and,
Sure.
get a good job, get a good education. Those are good things. So by his grace, he allowed me to, get to a better situation in life. And I'm thankful that I am born in America and that I'm able to rise above my circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
But God said, that's not all I want for you, Bonnie. So when I found that birth certificate, I started investigating my past. I actually started experiencing anxiety and depression and panic attacks. And I didn't know why, because I was so accomplished. I had lots of friends in my life. I wasn't socially lonely. Does that make sense? I had lots of friends. I was involved in church. And I didn't understand, why am I having anxiety and panic attacks? And so I secretly went to find a Christian therapist because I was so afraid of telling anybody, because my identity was wrapped around being the encourager, wrapped around being the leader, wrapped around being the Bible teacher, a speaker, a Christian author. And so I was so scared. Oh my gosh, if people knew I was having anxiety and panic attacks, they might think my faith is flawed, that I am flawed. It's like my worst nightmare was that people would think I was broken. So all the things I kind of I was telling you about, hiding and trying to put more what I thought were more beautiful pieces of my identity together. I was so confused. Why am I having anxiety, panic attacks? And I didn't want to tell anybody. People might think there's something wrong with my marriage, but my husband's very loving. To make, this long story short of this book, I went to see this therapist in secret, and I said, hey, I don't know why I'm waking up every 2 hours, having panic attacks, choking. I don't know why I'm waking up from insomnia, and I'm waking up obsessing over worries over and over again. And I said, I'm praying, I'm reading the Bible, what's going on? And he said, within a minute, Randy, just what I just shared with you, he said, you have PTSD. And I was like, I'm not a soldier. That's all I knew about PTSD. I've never seen anything violent. And he said, did you know that verbal abuse and emotional abuse has the same impact on your body as physical abuse? And the mic dropped, because I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Well, and I'm guessing, and I'm no shrink, but it sounds like, I've known people who bury the emotions, who bury the pain, and burying the past. If it's not dealt with, it tends to come up, and it's like lava under the surface of the earth. Eventually, it's going to erupt. And for a lot of people, it's really destructive when it erupts, which is why it needs to be dealt with. Was there any of that going on?
So that's exactly what it is. Because I asked him, I said, well, why is it happening now? Everything's peaceful in my life. I was in my 30s, so I had worked for, 13 years in Silicon Valley. I was, by God's grace, fortunate enough that I worked for many years. I was able to stay at home with my children at that time and not have to work, And he said, well, did you know that a soldier doesn't experience panic attacks or anxiety when he's on the battlefield? When he's being strong and resourceful, when he's helping others and being positive and getting through the hard times. When does the soldier experience anxiety and panic attacks?
That's when he comes home.
It's when he comes home.
Yeah.
He said the way God created our nervous system, it protects us when we're in the battlefield, emotional battlefield, or like say during this pandemic, we're in the battlefield of surviving, trying to figure out what should we do about our health, our finances, our marriage, or parenting, or anything. The way God created us, it shields us from the anxiety, our bodies from feeling it. But once we're in a safe place, and for me, it was motherhood.
Yeah.
It was motherhood because I finally breathed that sigh of exhale, like, oh, praise the Lord. He got me through the hard times. Now I can create a new family. That was when the anxiety, my body was able to express what it could not earlier. So my therapist said, I want our listeners and viewers to hear this. It wasn't the present day Bonnie that was experiencing the anxiety panic attacks. It's all the stuff like you were saying, Randy, that I had buried. Mm-hmm. And I used the Christianese forgetting the past. And I went back and I double clicked on the passage. If you read it in context, actually Apostle Paul wasn't asking us to forget the past. He was talking about forgetting his past identity as a Pharisee. His past identity of focusing on the externals of his faith.
Yeah,
and in fact, he said, yeah, that's significant. He said, but whole different, because he said, once now I'm focusing on Christ. And if you read that context, it's the suffering of Christ. So it changed everything. I wasn't ashamed anymore, Randy, because he said, it's not your faith that's flawed. He said, it's because your faith has been strong. It's because you've done good, girl. It's because you've done good, strong in your faith to survive all these hard times with God. But now God is saying, it's time for you to heal. Yeah. It's time for you now to explore all those things. And it was really grieving the father that left me, grieving the mother that I wish I had, that, I wish I could come home and find a mom who could, hold me in her arms and hug me, or, was there to say, I'm so sorry that your dad isn't here. I mean, at the time I thought they were childish, but God helped me realize, no, it's childlike faith. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever have any, has there been anything come full circle with your mother or your father?
I like to talk about this because this is one of the first questions I get asked. I like to say this: forgiveness is always one way. We have the ability to forgive, meaning we're going to let that person go. We don't expect them to give us anything in return. I don't expect my mother to make up for the hurt she's, put upon my childhood. Right. But reconciliation takes two. So forgiveness does not give the other person permission to continue to hurt us. So I have very, very strong boundaries. And to leave us all on a cliffhanger, because I want you to get the book Sweet Like Jasmine, I want you to find out what happens when I go and try to find my father. And what does he do when I find him? And what does he say? And what has happened with that relationship? And I also had to go against my mother's wishes because she forbid me to find my father. She said, if I ever find out you try to find your father, I will disown you. Wow. So what happens is part of that cliffhanger story, which is the page turner to Sweet Like Jasmine. But what I can say is that this is very important for anybody that's in a toxic relationship, dysfunctional, whether it's your children, because I'm a soul care mentor, and I speak. I do lots of different speaking opportunities, leading groups, and people tell me my child is abusing me, and they're afraid to share it in church. My spouse is emotionally abusive, but I'm afraid people will judge me, or my mother or my father-in-law or somebody at church, somebody watching, listening right now. There's, church ministry, emotional abuse that's going on. And so we need to know that we don't have to be afraid of being judged for not forgiving. We can speak the truth. It's not our job to protect the person who has hurt us. It's our job to speak up and protect and take care of ourselves, because you are worthy. So Randy, when you asked me, did I suffer from lack of worth? It didn't show up in the way it usually did. It showed up because I didn't have a voice. That was where my lack of self-worth was, because I felt I need to take any kind of abuse, verbally, emotionally, I said, I felt I didn't have a voice. That's when my worth didn't show up. I felt it's more important for me to be content than to be joyful or to have peace. I thought that being joyful or having peace meant last place for me. Everybody else in my life, I need to make sure everybody else was okay. So that's how my lack of self-worth showed up.
I'm guessing this is an ongoing process.
Yes, and I am proud to say that because this is not it. There's no tidy bow because not everybody has loving mother or loving father or loving, you can name it. And that's why we need each other. Yeah. That's why I need other people in God's family to be the offering me the nurturing, mothering, and reparenting ourselves. Men need to reparent each other. Men, brothers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And women need to do that. So this is what, it means to be in the body of God. This is what the gospel is. It's saying, you know what, this is the reality of my life, of this broken world we live in. And so, like for instance, there's one woman, Sally, she's an older grandma. She's very loving, but she was telling me when I was chatting with her that she's inviting her grandkids to go pick peaches in the summer. And I was like, I've never picked peaches. And my kids, they don't have that loving grandma in their lives. So I asked her, I said, hey, my kids have never picked peaches. I go, could we come visit you sometime? Can you take us to go pick peaches? And so there's the body of Christ right there, just for an afternoon. And so that's like a beautiful picture of how we're there for each other. And so I never even made a peach cobbler, but there she was. After we picked peaches, she says, come on over, let's make some peach cobbler. That's God's family. That's God's love right there.
That's God's food right there.
Exactly. That's the gospel. That's gospel right there.
So let me ask you this, because being a mother from Hong Kong, mail order bride growing up in Chinatown is not the typical American thing. And I don't just mean white versus Asian. That's fairly unique.
Yes.
But what you're saying, I'm guessing that you're getting response from everybody because these things are universal.
Oh, yeah. And people even in loving families, because I'm doing a book club. We have 1,000 people that are online right now reading this book together. And there's women that are from very loving families. But for instance, one woman had said, you know what, I'm like the quiet middle child, and I just want everybody to be happy. They relate to that kind of identity. Each of us has carried some sort of identity that we've taken on. And it doesn't mean that our families are bad or, they did something wrong. It's just normal human. We're all human. And so we all kind of take on a certain identity. And that's the gospel. The gospel is saying, you know what, God's continually freeing us to take off whatever identity isn't part of what he wants for us that will give us joy and peace. So during the pandemic, I know a lot of people have been reevaluating, wait, why am I doing what I'm doing? Yeah. Is this really what gives me joy or life or peace? I think I need to address some hard things. It's like we can't run away from them. So it's been a rich opportunity to actually connect with other people because people are really ready. They're like, oh no, I'm fine. I want to tell you what's going on. So that is one blessing in disguise of the pandemic. It's kind of like everybody has something to say about what's really hard right now. Yeah,
no doubt. A lot of soul searching going on, and that can be healthy if it points you back to God. But man, I just think that if we don't point people to Christ, they're just going to be wandering in the desert for the rest of their lives potentially. And so I appreciate what you're doing. This is the book. It's Sweet Like Jasmine. It's available right now. You can go to sweetlikejasmine.com. And Bonnie, before I let you go, I want people to know about the podcast that you do. So tell us what you're doing there and how people can join you on that.
Well, that's kind of the whole point of this book, is that God takes our brokenness and he makes it beautiful. So every story that I've told you, it sounds broken, which it is, but then God uses it. Once it's open, God can then fill it up with what we need. Once we realize what we need, we can then make the choices that are healthy for our wellness. And so Breathe the Stressless podcast came out of that. So this is a podcast that I host about 15, 20 minutes. I give a word of affirmation, because I really needed that, Randy, to be able to hear God's word, like you said, that God points us to goodness and beauty. word of affirmation, and also something practical that we can do to help our bodies and our emotions feel better. Because that was kind of like a foreign language for me. Like, I didn't know what it meant to quote unquote take care of myself. I mean, that's just yeah, like that's from another planet. Like, no, like I take care of others. So I had to learn. So there's really fun facts that we can learn how God created our bodies, that we can do things to help us feel better and release serotonin, all the good, happy hormones. Yeah. It can combat stress because we can't give out unless we are poured into. So that's Breathe the Stress Less podcast.
It's hard to love your neighbor as yourself if you hate yourself. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are there. I'm not putting that on this person in the audience that's watching right now, but someone, I want to let you address this, and I know we're going along, but I think this is important. Someone who has said that should understand how you met a good husband after so much rejection, because this person lost everything after an abusive mother, and then had kids with another abuser. And we see that pattern a lot. People who have suffered in a certain way end up, I don't understand all the dynamics, but they end up with someone who does the same thing. I know you don't know the whole story here, but I mean, in general, how do you break out of that, do you think?
I think this is the most beautiful thing. We need to know, and I'll just read this really quick. This is a quote from my book. I said, "Beloved, you are never meant to carry secrets alone indefinitely. The burden of an untold story is too heavy for you to bear. When you allow someone to see where your pain once wounded you, you'll discover that that pain has a purpose. That pain has a purpose. So every time there was something painful or broken, I just say, hey, God, what is it you want to rewrite into my life? The Apostle Paul said that we are living epistles. We're living letters of God. So whatever has happened in our lives, we can say, hey, God, it's never too late. Never too late, dear listener, reader. How is God wanting to rewrite that pain and bring some purpose in it? And that's where I always head. Okay, here's the valley. What do you want to show me in this brokenness? And we need each other. So that's the thing. We are not to carry it alone, because that was one family code, was the shame of silence. Because once we reach out to other people that have been on the same journey, realize there's other people that have found a path through it. And you'll find in my book that God placed many different people in my life. And if there's anything that I did do out of God's grace, was that I did talk or ask somebody, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And that's where God's family showed up. But it was a big risk because some people won't help or some people won't understand. But I always just knew Jesus is my shepherd. He was the only one that understood me. And I'm like, God, I know you're real, so you got to get me through it. Who can help me? I need somebody. So you just need to know that we can rewrite it. And another line from my book I wrote is, your flaws do not disqualify you from being loved. Yeah. Your flaws give somebody access to really know you and love you the way God intended. So don't edit yourself. Because when you try to please everyone, you end up losing yourself. Now listen, I want to really empower you with this verse. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. So no matter what has happened to you, I always say, let's look at how God wants to rewrite that. What is the purpose in the pain? And that's where we take action. But you don't have to do it alone, and we can't do it alone. We need to invite somebody else in. And look for someone that has a similar story. That has found that path of healing to the other side. That's why I wrote this book, because I want people to know you don't have to stay there. You don't have to stay stuck, because God says you're worthy and nothing that has happened to you can change your worth. So let's start looking at what choices, what actions we can take now. And you're still the beloved. No flaws disqualify you from being beautiful and beloved. In God's eyes, you are perfect, and God will help us.
I love it. And for those of you watching, especially the one who commented, take that to heart. Seriously. You can get out of that valley. And it does require God's help. And I do believe Bonnie's correct. It requires the body of Christ, which are his people, and you seek them out, and the ones that are not able to help or don't
Yeah.
want to help, let
Yes.
them go. Don't get hung up on them, but keep moving,
Yes.
and God will lead you to someone that can help you. Bonnie, thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's why those of you that are listening that have already made it to the other side, meaning other side of healing, and God's continually healing us and putting parts together. The word peace, there's a favorite, Isaiah 26:3 says, perfect peace comes to those who trust in the Lord. Okay, perfect peace. Guess what? The word perfect doesn't mean flawless.
Whole.
The word perfect means whole.
Mm-hmm.
And the word peace, shalom, actually is a word of movement. It means gathering all different pieces to come together. Mm-hmm. So every time you see a piece that is broken, we just want to ask, hey, God, I know you want to build something beautiful through this piece. What is it? And we need to share the brokenness. So why am I sharing about my mom, yelling at me with the verbal abuse? It's not to get back at her. It's letting other people know that have been through verbal or emotional abuse that there is hope.
Yeah.
It's not the end. Our story isn't done being written. And if I can find that path with God, you can too. The thing that helped me was to know that I was understood. I was not alone, and that I don't have to be ashamed. So I will talk about anywhere God has led me through. And so those of you that made it through something hard, maybe you feel, oh gosh, I want to keep that private. Please don't keep it private, because somebody like me and this listener, we need to hear that, hey, you've been through this valley and you can be that comfort, that you can be that loving voice. Yeah. That's really what gives us strength. And we see Jesus doing that. He resurrected with scars in his hand and his side. That's what gave Thomas that faith to say, oh, wow, you're real. So that is the beauty right now, even in my parenting, it's changed everything. I said, at the end of the day, all I need to do is be there for my kids. I'm not perfect. We all have imperfect moments, but at the end of the day, my children know that I am there for them and with them. And that's the thing we can offer. And that's really God's peace, is that it's our presence. Yep. So don't give up. Those that are listening, those of you who've been through a hard time, I want you to be bold and brave. Share your voice, share your story, because that is going to free somebody up.
Yep, absolutely. And just like Bonnie said about her children, God, the perfect Father, He is with us and He is for us. And you just need to know that is true. Whatever you're going through, He's with you and He's for you. Bonnie, thanks again. Appreciate you sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. You're a very easy person to talk to because you've lived such a rich life. You have the gift of discernment. You're a wonderful listener. And so I just love spending this time with you.
Well, thank you. Some days are better than others. all by the grace of God. You can find Bonnie's website, Sweet Like Jasmine, looks just like this. And you can get the book there, find out the rest of the story. Thanks for the cliffhanger there, Bonnie. And of course, her book is available wherever you get books. Looks like this, Sweet Like Jasmine. Check out her website. If you haven't subscribed or followed Life Today, please do it now. And we'll see you again next time here on Life Today Live.
We float on the vast, limitless sea of divine